I never thought I'd be the type of woman who'd abandon her family on Thanksgiving Day. Yet there I was, sitting at gate 36 at O'Hare, clutching a one-way ticket to Sanibel Island, while my mother-in-law was probably standing in my kitchen, tapping her foot and checking her watch. 3 hours earlier, she'd cornered me in my own pantry and whispered, "I invited a few more people to dinner. We'll be 30 now. You can handle that, right? After all, a good wife knows how to adapt." Then she patted my cheek with her cold hand, the one with the emerald ring my husband's father gave her 40 years ago, a ring she made sure I knew I would never be worthy of inheriting. What Margaret didn't know was that I'd discovered something about her precious ring 2 weeks ago, something that would shatter the Hamilton family legacy she'd spent decades polishing to perfection. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I ended up married to her golden boy, trapped in a suburban Chicago nightmare, and why disappearing on America's most family-oriented holiday was actually the bravest thing I've ever done. The Hamiltons are Chicago royalty, old money that dates back to the early meatpacking days. Not Rockefeller wealthy, but comfortable enough to have a summer house on Lake Michigan and winter in Scottsdale. My husband James is the youngest of 3 boys, the only one who disappointed by going into education instead of finance or law. I met him at Northwestern, where I was working on my PhD in literature. He was kind, unassuming, and nothing like the entitled men I'd dated before. Margaret Hamilton ruled her family with a velvet fist. On the surface, she was the quintessential Midwestern matriarch, active in her Episcopal church, president of the Garden Club, and always the first to deliver a casserole when someone in their North Shore community was ill. But behind closed doors, she was meticulous about maintaining the family's social standing and ruthless about who belonged. "You're lucky to have caught James's eye," she told me the first time we met over brunch at the Chicago Athletic Association. "Most Hamilton men marry within a certain circle, but James always had a soft spot for strays." She smiled as she cut into her Eggs Benedict. I should have walked away then, but James squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes pleading. My own family couldn't have been more different. I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois, where my father ran the local hardware store and my mother taught 2nd grade. They were good, honest people who measured worth by character, not tax brackets. When my parents died in a car accident during my first year of grad school, the Hamiltons became my only family by default. The first Thanksgiving I spent with them was a master class in subtle humiliation. Margaret asked me to bring a pie, so I spent hours making my mother's heirloom apple pie recipe. When I proudly set it on the sideboard, Margaret said, "Oh, how rustic. We usually get our desserts from Vanille Patisserie, but this adds a certain folksy charm." She then proceeded to serve everyone tiny slivers, as if my pie might contain something contagious. When James proposed, he did it with his grandmother's ring, a modest sapphire that I adored. Margaret was horrified. "But darling, I always assumed you'd give your wife the Carmichael diamond," she said, referring to an ostentatious family heirloom. James stood his ground, one of the few times I'd seen her defy her. Our wedding was a battleground. I wanted small and intimate. Margaret insisted on a 300-person affair at the Chicago Botanic Garden. "The Hamiltons have certain obligations," she explained, as if speaking to a child. I compromised on almost everything except the dress. I refused her suggestion of a more flattering gown from a designer she approved of. Despite these tensions, I tried to win her approval. I volunteered for her charities, I hosted dinner parties with her friends, I even joined her insufferable book club where no one actually read the books. And for 7 years, I endured the subtle digs at holidays, the pointed comments about when we would produce grandchildren, a painful subject as we'd been struggling with infertility, and the way she'd rearrange my furniture when she visited because this configuration makes more sense, dear. The grand gesture came on our 5th anniversary. James surprised me with a renovation of our backyard into an English garden, complete with a small writing studio where I could work on my novel. It was perfect, until I discovered Margaret had not only financed it, but had given the architect specific instructions that overrode several of my preferences. "I know what works for Hamilton properties," she told James. It wasn't a gift. It was a reminder that even my creative space wasn't truly mine. But everything changed 2 weeks ago when I was helping Margaret look for a missing earring in her bathroom. As I moved her jewelry box, a false bottom shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a letter dated 1973 from Margaret to her brother-in-law Charles, James's uncle. The letter referenced our secret and what we did that summer. But what caught my eye was the mention of the emerald ring, the sacred Hamilton heirloom that Margaret wore like a crown. According to the letter, it wasn't a Hamilton family piece at all. Margaret had lost the original in 1973 and had it secretly replaced, creating an elaborate story about its provenance to cover her tracks. The family's most treasured heirloom was a fake, and only Margaret and Charles knew. I carefully replaced everything, my heart pounding. This was the chink in Margaret's perfect armor, the secret that would prove once and for all that her meticulously constructed image was built on lies. Thanksgiving at the Hamilton house was always a production. This year, however, Margaret had decided that our home would host the celebration. Our home, the 1920s Tudor in Evanston that James and I had lovingly restored. The one place I felt was truly ours, despite Margaret's frequent suggestions. "It's time you stepped up," she had announced over Sunday dinner 3 weeks ago. "I've been carrying the holiday traditions long enough. 20 people, formal service, my usual menu. I'll email you the recipes." James had beamed with pride, interpreting this as his mother finally accepting me. I knew better. This was a test, one designed for me to fail. I'd spent weeks preparing. The table settings, the decorations, the timing of dishes. I'd even hired a local college student to help serve. Margaret had called every day with a new helpful tip or an addition to the guest list. "The governor's wife's cousin is in town. I told her to join us. The Baldwins are bringing their daughter and her new husband. Remember, we always use the Limoges china, not those modern plates you bought." 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was already exhausted when Margaret and Arthur, James's father, arrived to help. Arthur immediately retreated to the den with his newspaper, while Margaret inspected every corner of my preparations. "You're brining the turkey? That's not how Hamiltons do it." She frowned at my carefully prepared bird. "And these napkins are too casual." Fortunately, I brought the family linens. She produced a box of yellowing napkins with the Hamilton monogram. That evening, I overheard her on the phone. Yes, I know it's a risk letting her handle everything, but James insisted. We can always order from the club if it's a disaster. My hands trembled as I chopped vegetables for the stuffing. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke at 5 a.m. to begin cooking. James had promised to help, but Margaret had whisked him away to pick up his brother from the airport. "Men are useless in the kitchen anyway," she'd said with a wink. By noon, my kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. The college student had called in sick, the turkey was roasting, pies cooling on the rack, sides in various stages of preparation. The doorbell rang continuously as relatives arrived, each one poking their head into the kitchen with a comment. "Smells interesting in here. My doctor says those potatoes have too much cream. Is the turkey supposed to be that color?" Margaret glided through it all in her perfectly pressed St. John suit, accepting compliments for her family recipes that I was executing. I caught her rearranging my centerpiece when she thought I wasn't looking. At 2 p.m., as I was mashing potatoes with shaking hands, Margaret cornered me in the pantry with her "few more people" bombshell. 30 guests, for a table set for 20, with food prepared for 22. I'd accounted for seconds. "But, Margaret, we don't have enough food," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. A good hostess always makes it work, she replied with that saccharine smile. Just serve smaller portions. No one will notice. And where will they sit? We don't have enough chairs. Oh, James can eat standing up. He could use the exercise anyway. She patted my arm. This is what being a Hamilton wife means, grace under pressure. As she turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and Judith commented that the gravy seems lumpy. I told her you were still learning." I stood frozen in the pantry, listening to the chatter and laughter from the living room. Through the doorway, I could see Margaret holding court, gesturing toward the kitchen as she spoke. Poor dear is overwhelmed. First major holiday, you know. James caught my eye across the room and gave me a thumbs up, oblivious to my distress. His brother clapped him on the shoulder and said something that made them both laugh. That's when my phone dinged with a text from our neighbor. Saw 3 more cars with out-of-state plates pulling up. Everything okay? Need backup? I stepped back into the kitchen, where the turkey timer was beeping insistently. As I opened the oven, Margaret appeared at my elbow. "It's not quite the golden brown we usually achieve," she observed. "Perhaps a bit more time?" "It's done, Margaret. The thermometer says 165 degrees. Thermometers can be wrong, dear. Hamilton turkeys are always golden. Another 20 minutes should do it. It will dry out. Better dry than undercooked. Salmonella is so embarrassing at a family gathering." Before I could respond, her brother-in-law Charles, the very same Charles from the letter, walked into the kitchen. He gave me a pitying smile before turning to Margaret. "Maggie, isn't that the Carmichael's serving platter? I thought it was being repaired after you dropped it last Christmas." A flicker of panic crossed Margaret's face. "No, this is a different one." "Could have sworn." Charles frowned, then shrugged. "Memory's not what it used to be." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she straightened her emerald ring, the fake emerald ring. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw fear in hers. The moment was interrupted by James's cousin announcing loudly from the dining room, "Does anyone else smell something burning?" I rushed to rescue the rolls I'd forgotten in the second oven, only to find Margaret already pulling them out, her face a mask of disappointed resignation. "I guess we'll have to do without," she sighed loudly. "Such a shame." As I stood there, watching her performance, something inside me snapped. 7 years of diminishment. 7 years of trying to be worthy of the Hamilton name. 7 years of failing by design. I looked at my watch. The airport was 30 minutes away. There was a 5:15 flight to Florida still available. I'd checked it obsessively all morning. A secret escape plan I hadn't admitted to myself I was considering. Margaret returned to the living room, already crafting the narrative of my failure. I heard her voice, soft but carrying. "She tries so hard, bless her heart." That southern bless her heart, the ultimate condescension from a woman who'd grown up in Winnetka and had never lived south of the Chicago city limits. I removed my apron, walked calmly to our bedroom, and packed a small bag. I returned to the kitchen, handbag over my shoulder and small suitcase beside me. The Hamilton family was migrating toward the dining room, champagne flutes in hand. My dining room, with its table now crowded with extra place settings and chairs borrowed from every room in the house. "There she is," James smiled, raising his glass. "The chef herself." I stood in the doorway, frozen in place. Margaret was at the head of my table, the seat that should have been mine as hostess, rearranging the silverware at the place settings nearest her. "Everyone find your seats," she announced. "I've taken the liberty of creating place cards." She gestured to the elegant calligraphy cards I hadn't provided. Somehow, in the midst of everything else, she'd managed to create a seating arrangement that put me between James's deaf great-uncle and his cousin's sullen teenage son, at the far end of the table away from James. Margaret looked up and noticed my suitcase. A flash of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by a tight smile. "Going somewhere, dear? Perhaps to get more ice." Her voice carried just enough edge that heads turned. The room quieted. 29 faces swiveled between us like spectators at a tennis match. Actually, Margaret, I'm leaving. My voice was steadier than I expected. James stepped toward me, confusion etched on his face. What do you mean, leaving? Dinner's ready. Is it? I gestured to the kitchen behind me. Why don't you ask your mother what's actually ready and what isn't? Ask her how many people she invited without telling me until 3 hours ago. Ask her why she told everyone I was failing when she set me up to fail from the beginning. The room fell silent. Margaret's face hardened. I think the stress has gotten to her, she stage whispered to Arthur. Perhaps we should call Dr. Feldman. That was it, the final straw. 7 years of accumulated humiliation crystallized into perfect clarity. Before I go, I think there's something everyone should know about Margaret. I stepped fully into the room. Something about the famous Hamilton emerald. Margaret's hand flew to her throat, where the ring hung on a chain for special occasions. This is hardly the time. It's a fake. My voice rang out clearly. The original was lost in 1973, in the summer, during a certain indiscretion with Charles. Charles, across the table, choked on his champagne. I found your letter, Margaret, the one where you explained to Charles how you'd had a replica made because you lost the original during your affair with him, an affair that happened while Arthur was serving overseas, if I have my dates right. Arthur's face drained of color. James's older brothers exchanged shocked glances. The great Hamilton emerald, the symbol of your family legacy, is a cubic zirconia and a gold-plated setting from a jeweler in Oak Park. I called them yesterday. They still had the receipt. Margaret's face had gone from porcelain white to mottled red. How dare you? She hissed. How dare I? You've spent 7 years making me feel unworthy of your precious family, unworthy of your son. You've undermined me, corrected me, and humiliated me at every turn, all while wearing a fake ring and living a fake life. I turned to James, whose mouth hung open in shock. I've tried, James. God knows I've tried to be what she wanted, but it was never going to be enough because she decided before she met me that no one would be good enough for her son. Lisa, please, James started, but I cut him off. No, I'm done pleasing people who can't be pleased. I'm done being measured against a standard that doesn't even exist. I looked around at the stunned faces. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. The turkey is perfectly cooked despite what Margaret told you. The gravy isn't lumpy. And those rolls she said were burnt, they're fine. She hid them in the warming drawer. Where are you going? James asked, his voice small. Somewhere warm. Somewhere I can breathe. As I turned to leave, Margaret found her voice. This is absurd. She's lying. Tell them, Charles. All eyes turned to Charles, who stared into his champagne glass, unable to meet Arthur's questioning gaze. The ring is a family heirloom, Margaret insisted, her voice rising. It's been in the Hamilton family for generations. Then why does it have CZ stamped inside the band? I asked. I checked when you were in the shower yesterday. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Arthur slowly turned to his wife, 60 years of trust crumbling in his eyes. Is it true? He asked quietly. Margaret's silence was answer enough. I walked out the front door to the Uber waiting in the driveway, Margaret's angry denials fading behind me. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of James through the bay window, standing apart from his family, watching me leave. In that moment, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only release, as if I'd put down a weight I'd been carrying for 7 long years. The Sanibel Island air hit me like a warm embrace when I stepped off the plane. I'd chosen this destination on a whim. My parents had taken me here once as a child, and I remembered feeling perfectly content collecting seashells at sunset. I checked into a beachfront hotel, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to the water's edge. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath that didn't feel like it was being measured by someone else. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since I left Chicago. Texts from James ranging from confused to angry to pleading. Voicemails from various Hamiltons, some sympathetic, others outraged. I silenced it all and watched the sun sink into the Gulf of Mexico. By Saturday morning, the story had fully unraveled back in Evanston. James's older brother Michael called. I answered only because he had never been unkind to me. "It's chaos here," he said without preamble. "Dad's moved into the guest room. Charles's wife isn't speaking to anyone. And Mom," he paused, "Mom's empire is crumbling." "I'm sorry for your father," I said, and meant it. Arthur had always been gentle, if somewhat passive. "Don't be," he said. "It explains a lot. Apparently, he's had suspicions for decades, but chose to ignore them." Michael's voice softened. "Lisa, what you did was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, but either way, you forced this family to face some hard truths." After we hung up, I got a text from James's sister-in-law, Diane. "For what it's worth, I've wanted to say what you said for 15 years. Margaret made my early years in this family hell too. Call me when you're ready." On Sunday night, James showed up at my hotel. I wasn't entirely surprised. He'd always been persistent. He looked exhausted, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his eyes rimmed with red. "You could have told me," were his first words as we sat on my balcony overlooking the beach. "Would you have believed me?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I've spent my whole life believing my mother's version of reality." "That's why I couldn't tell you. I needed to break free, not fight a battle I couldn't win." James stared out at the darkening water. "After you left, everything fell apart. Not just the dinner, though that was a disaster. The family. All those perfect Hamilton holiday memories. Turns out everyone was miserable, just playing their parts." I learned that after I left, Charles had finally admitted to the affair. It had lasted not just one summer, but almost 2 years. The emerald ring had indeed been lost during a weekend they'd spent at a lake house in Wisconsin, while Arthur was stationed in Germany. Margaret had been so terrified of losing her social standing that she'd had a replica made and constructed an elaborate lie about its history. "The irony," James said, "is that no one would have cared about the damn ring. But the lies, those have done damage that might never be repaired." He told me how his father had spent the night in a hotel, then returned the next day with divorce papers already drawn up. How his oldest brother had finally confessed that he'd been miserable in finance for 20 years, but had been afraid to disappoint Margaret. How his sister-in-law revealed that she'd suffered through postpartum depression alone because Margaret had convinced her it would be embarrassing for the family to seek help. "It's like you pulled one thread and the whole tapestry came undone," James said. We talked until sunrise, about our marriage, about the subtle ways Margaret had come between us, about the children we'd been trying for, and how her constant comments about my failure to produce Hamilton heirs had added unbearable pressure. "I enabled her," James admitted. "I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was just allowing her to hurt you." As dawn broke over the ocean, James asked, "What happens now?" I didn't have a clear answer. Part of me wanted to rebuild with this new, more aware version of my husband. Another part knew that some damage couldn't be undone. "I need time," I said finally. "Time away from the Hamilton orbit to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to meet impossible standards." James nodded slowly. "I understand. I think I might need that too." He left that morning, but not before telling me about an unexpected development. The writing studio in our backyard, Margaret's grand gesture that had never felt like mine, had been completely redesigned. "I hired a new architect," James said. "Everything according to your original plans. No Hamilton influence. It will be waiting whenever you're ready to come home, if you choose to." Over the next few months, the Hamilton family underwent a transformation. Arthur filed for divorce and, to everyone's shock, began dating his longtime assistant. Margaret retreated to the Lake Michigan house, her social calendar suddenly empty as friends distanced themselves from the scandal. Charles and his wife entered counseling. James's oldest brother quit his finance job and opened a sailing school, his childhood dream. I stayed in Florida, renting a small cottage near the beach. I resumed work on my novel, the one about a woman finding her voice after years of silence. I reconnected with old friends from grad school. I started therapy to understand why I'd allowed myself to be diminished for so long. James and I spoke weekly, then daily. He was in therapy too, unraveling a lifetime of manipulation. We met occasionally on neutral ground, neither Chicago nor Florida, but places new to both of us. New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, places with their own complex histories where we could write ours anew. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I received a small package from Arthur Hamilton. Inside was a simple note. This belonged to my mother. She was a kind woman who valued authenticity above all. I think she would have wanted you to have it. Beneath the note was a modest pearl ring. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, but genuine and beautiful in its simplicity. That same week, I got an unexpected call from Margaret. Her voice was subdued, lacking its usual authoritative tone. "I won't apologize," she began, predictably, "but I will acknowledge that I was harsh with you." It wasn't much, but from Margaret, it was seismic. "The emerald was never what mattered," I told her. "It was the lies you built around it." After a long pause, she said, "I've spent my life maintaining a facade. I don't know how to live any other way." "Maybe it's time to find out," I suggested. The most surprising twist came in late spring. James's brother Michael called to tell me that their mother had sold the Lake Michigan house and most of her jewelry. She'd used the proceeds to establish a mental health foundation for new mothers, inspired by what her daughter-in-law had endured. It wasn't redemption, but it was something like evolution. As for James and me, we decided to start over. Not in Evanston or anywhere near Chicago, but in a small coastal town in North Carolina where neither of us had any history. He found a position teaching at a local college. I finished my novel. We bought a simple house with a sunroom where I could write and a yard where, someday, children might play. We didn't invite any Hamiltons to our housewarming, though Arthur sent a handmade quilt from his mother's collection. Even Margaret kept her distance, sending only a brief note, "May your new home be filled with truth." On our first Thanksgiving in our new home, we invited neighbors and colleagues, people who knew us only as James and Lisa, not as Hamiltons or former Hamiltons. I cooked a simple meal. Nobody commented on the gravy or rearranged my centerpiece. James carved the turkey, and we ate on mismatched plates that we'd collected from various trips. After dinner, as our guests chatted over coffee, James handed me a small box. Inside was his grandmother's sapphire ring, the one he'd originally proposed with, the one Margaret had disapproved of. "I had it resized," he said. "I thought maybe we could start again." I slipped it on my finger, where it fit perfectly, like coming home to a place I'd never been before. Looking back now, I realized that boarding that plane wasn't just an escape. It was the first truly honest act of my married life. Sometimes walking away isn't cowardice. It's the bravest choice you can make. The Hamiltons taught me that family isn't always defined by shared DNA or marriage certificates. Sometimes it's found in the people who see your true worth without needing you to prove it. My mother-in-law's fake emerald turned out to be the most valuable gift she ever gave me, the key that unlocked my own authenticity. I've learned that the most meaningful traditions aren't the ones handed down to us, but the ones we create with intention and love. If you're living someone else's version of your life, know that it's never too late to rewrite the story. Your holiday table can be any shape you want it to be, with any people you choose to invite. And sometimes the empty chair, the one you were brave enough to leave, becomes the seat where your true self can finally sit down. If you found something in my story that resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can pack isn't in your suitcase. It's the courage to choose yourself, even when 30 pairs of judging eyes are watching. Until next time, this is Lisa, no longer a Hamilton, finally and completely herself.